Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Christy Harrington, and I'm the Senior Director of Marketing here at PestRoutes. I want to welcome everybody today. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for turning analytics into action, driving company goals and employee performance. So we have some great guests presenting today, Vinay Raman of CAARMO and Edmund Mackey of Aptive Environmental. So during their presentation, we're going to be asking some polling questions for you to participate in. They're going to pop right up on the screen for you. You just enter your answer when you see those. But before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of background on our special guests. So I'm going to start with Vinay. By combining his passions for creating greater effectiveness through data analytics and helping companies of all sizes grow, one thing became perfectly clear to Vinay. Harnessing the success of any organization lies in the desire and passion of its people. Now, after 25 years of analysis and work with machine learning and artificial intelligence, he is a beacon in the analytics and leadership spaces and works to empower business leaders to lift their employees and businesses to greater heights and unlock their own greatest potential through data analysis. Raman holds degrees in mathematics, computer science, and artificial intelligence. To date, he has founded or run 6 different companies, including his current company, CAARMO, which teaches business leaders how to control their own destiny by using their existing data more effectively. And also with us, as I mentioned, we have Edmund Mackey. He's the accomplished senior executive and growth strategist with more than 20 years of success in subscription-based consumer service industries. His broad areas of expertise includes digital transformation, corporate strategy and analytics, customer segmentation, pricing, sales enablement, service design, and direct-to-consumer marketing. In 2018, Mackey joined Aptive Environmental as Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer, and in 2021 migrated into the Chief Operating Officer role. During his tenure, Aptive has grown from $89 million in annual revenue to $273 million in 2020. Mackey holds a Master of Science in Accounting and Finance from Nova Southeastern University in Florida and a Bachelor of Applied Science and Economics from Youngstown State University in Ohio. Welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you and let you get started today with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I will first say that I had the opportunity to come out here to Provo, Utah to sit with Edmund. I've never been out to Provo, Utah, and I was just telling him a little earlier this morning, I got a chance to go out into the mountains here and see Bridal Veil Falls. And if it's not on your to-do list to go see Bridal Veil Falls, you're missing something of one of nature's wonders. It is gorgeous.
It is. Yeah, we're fortunate. It's only 5 minutes from our office. So
being an East Coast guy, I've never appreciated the beauty out here. It's gorgeous. Well, hey, thanks everyone for taking some time to out of your day to listen in to us. The topic of our discussion today is turning analytics into action, driving company goals and employee performance. Edmund and I have been conversing on this topic on a number of different ways. I mean, trying to get to your company to be more successful. I mean, isn't that really what the goal is? That's what every day is all about, right?
well, yeah, it's the very elusive goal. It's everyone's quest. Very few people get there. But you know, being in business, that's what it's all about.
So hopefully what we can do today is take you through a little bit of what I'll call a journey here, a little bit of a story as to how you can start to think about making it less elusive. So let me go to the next slide here. And I want to start that story with what it's going to look like a little bit. And what you'll see hopefully between Edmund and I is I'm going to try to give you some of the stepping stones here. And I'd love Edmund to kind of chime in here, give some of the color to how you see it and how you perceive some of these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So analytics, data, these are words that people throw around all the time. But what does it really mean? And analytics is all about performance. So I'm going to give you a simple analogy here, and that is brushing your teeth. Brushing your teeth is something you do every day, and how many times you brush your teeth is important, right? Did you do it on Monday? Did you do it on Tuesday? And did you do it, right? And for your employees in an organization, there are tasks that you give them, and you want to be able to analyze it and measure it, and that's what I think a lot of people do. But over time, Did you brush your teeth every day is kind of the real question. What is your performance over time? What is that behavior? And I tell my kids, hey, you got to brush, get up every morning and brush your teeth. And I do the same. That's a behavior I've built over time. But that behavior, there's a bigger story to that. And that behavior over time becomes the story about whether am I going to brush my teeth. I mean, predictability in your business. I mean, is there any value in that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny you bring up toothbrushing. I have one of those connected toothbrushes. And so it's very humbling to actually see how long you actually brush your teeth, because that's not something you normally measure, but you're supposed to do it for, 2 minutes, right? And so actually seeing if you actually brush 2 minutes is very humbling, because most days you don't do it.
And if you really care about not going to see the dentist, right? I mean, I tell my kids all the time they've got to brush their teeth every day, so that hopefully I'll reduce my dental bills. So that story, that behavior over time, there's a financial impact to that. And I think that's the purpose and the goal of today's conversation, to talk about how you get this data over here and sort of connect that behavior and that story to that financial impact. Is that a fair way to say that?
It is. I think, with employees, especially, for me, analytics is as simple as, how do I know I'm getting the behaviors that I want? Everyone wants to believe that their team is the best, that they have the best employees, but how do you actually, with data, be able to tell that story of who's actually exhibiting the right behaviors all the time versus people that you may need to coach and develop, and how do I give very specific attaboys and feedback to the people that need it?
That's right. So I'm going to talk to you about a quote here that I have used, and as I will say, taking data to understand those behaviors and stories, and who do you coach and who do you say, hey, thank you to. This quote has helped me a lot, and I'm hoping you'll get some utility out of it as well. And it's that the greatest leaders are always looking for the emerging stories in their company so they can achieve the ending they want. I think of those Choose Your Own Adventure books I used to read when I was a little kid, right? You turn to a page, do you throw the bucket of water on the fire, or do you kick dirt on the fire, turn to page 9 or turn to page 49? You get to choose where you want to go. And how nice would it be if you could choose your own adventure in business, right? And if you can see the story starting to emerge, you can start to choose that. That's the idea. And that's the goal of what we're going to be doing here. Does that make some sense?
It does.
So the question that everyone asks us is, what is the story? Now, let's dig into that a little bit here. Now, you got lots of different employees. I mean, we've got a representative example of a multitude of different employees. They might be at one location, they might be multiple locations. They may have been there for a week or 2 days, they may have been there for 5 days, but each one has got a different story. And the reason that story matters is because each one has a different set of needs. You're talking about the coaching and being attaboys, and hey, I think we need to level up your performance here. Any thoughts on that in terms of understanding the needs of employees and kind of how that leads to make better decisions?
Yeah, I think if you simply just think of your employees as customers, I think it's very intuitive for business people to know intuitively that not all customers are the same. But when we tend to think of our employees, we don't transfer that thinking over to that. I think if you just make that simple mind shift, then it becomes a lot more natural to think of your employees as segments, right? You have some that just started 3 months ago. You have some that have been with you for 8 years or 10 years. You have others that have certain strengths, right? And so not all of them are the same. And as you look at not just data, but these stories, which I like that phrasing, that becomes a lot more natural to say, oh, these 2 of my team members need this from me or need this support from the business. These other 8 need this type of support. And so, I think it's very natural for business people to think of that from a customer lens. You just have to transfer that lens over to employees.
And it brings up a really good point. I know I'm guilty of this. Whenever I've managed people, I always manage people the way I like to be managed. Well, if I have 8 people working for me, for 2 or 3 of those people, that might be just perfect. But for the other 5 or 6, they're just kind of the Charlie Brown teacher talking in the background, wah, wah, wah. They have no idea what I'm saying. They don't know how to get there. And if you can start to understand what each one of them needs, right, you can start to help lead them to that path of success. I call it the preferred outcome.
Yes. Same with customers, right? Like if you don't confirm, and flex to your customers' needs, you lose them. Same with employees.
Yeah. So how do you manage them all? How do you unlock their potential? And the key point here is that in order to unlock their potential, you need to understand what makes Sam different from Chris, different from Teddy, even though they're in the exact same role. They may be a technician in the same exact office, but each one of them has a different story. They have different things that they understand different ways. And if you can start to see what their stories are, you can start to figure out how to make them unlock their superhero. So I've been talking at you here for a little bit, and I wanted to kind of make this a little interactive. So Christy and Lynn, this is, I think, an opportunity for us to get people to give us some comments. What data do you use in your business today to start to understand what's happening with your employees, your people, your technicians? What do you use today? And here's some ideas, revisits, harsh braking, production product. What do people use today? I'd love to see in the comments. Just type in and let us know what you use. And we can see if we can see some of those comments as well. All right, get that to work. Computer froze up on us.
We might have some shy folks right now. Here we go. Tech utilization.
All right, tech utilization, great. Route reports along with production and hours worked. Time on site, client feedback, product usage. Edmund, what do you see when you see some of these pieces of data? What kind of things come to mind for you?
Yeah, I love this. I think that one thing that is probably a little bit different from the evolution that I've had as an executive is not just thinking about productivity from an employee as their only value. And here there are a lot of utilization, like how efficiently am I using my labor, which is important. But I think you have to balance that with, I love that someone says client feedback, because that shows a different value. What do my customers think of my employee? I doubt if you asked a customer that you were measuring their utilization, that they would think that that was valuable, right? But the outcomes, did they do a quality job? Am I satisfied as a customer? Those are also things that I think, as more and more as I've evolved as an executive, that I tend to look at least equally to utilization type metrics.
Absolutely. So Carl, Tina, Chris, I appreciate you all sharing some of those pieces of information. And Natalie's saying we can't see the whole slide. We are able to fix that for Natalie.
Vinay, is the bottom of the slide, what data do you use today?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a black border down at the bottom. That's all you should be seeing. So there's green top on and a black.
Great. I can see the full slide. Hopefully that's okay. Natalie, let me know.
Sounds like you're seeing this whole thing. Let's keep moving here, but I appreciate those comments. We've got some more comments that we've got, or places for us to get. What am I doing wrong here? So the reason we asked that around the data and the metrics that you use is I want to kind of start to show you how you can start to think of it as a foundational layer to building these deeper narratives. As you start to say, what is the customer feedback, right? What is the net promoter score, right? You get a much richer and deeper story as to what's happening, right? And what this triangle here does is it starts to show you how you can start to level up how comprehensive or how holistic your understanding of the story is. Data is sort of that foundational place. That's the task, right? That's the, did I brush my teeth? Did I brush my teeth for 2 minutes today, right? Did I do it for 90 seconds, right? And how many times have I done that is something that you measure over time. And that's where you get to KPIs. A lot of people are familiar with KPIs, key performance indicators. So I brushed my teeth for 2 minutes on Monday, 2 minutes on Tuesday. Dad, I forgot to brush my teeth on Wednesday altogether. All right, so you're doing 2 out of 3 days. Okay, we got some room for improvement, right? But there's a deeper story than that as well, right? Those KPIs over time start to show you the behavior. Well, if it's 66% of the time or 2 out of 3 days that you tend to brush teeth, well, I'm going to start waking up every morning and saying to that kid, hey, have you brushed your teeth? Right? I asked them the right question to shift their behavior.
Yeah.
How does that kind of resonate with you?
No, I love that. I think that, when you have employees, the first thing is to establish that they know what you value as a company.
Mhm.
And all of those points, the data, the KPIs, which are behaviors over time, and over time across many different people, is culture, right? And so when it all aligns to what the business values, then that's where you have this sort of sweet spot of, your employees don't take it as if you're trying to be the police to say, hey, make sure you brush your teeth. It's like, no, brushing your teeth is beneficial for these reasons. And so I'm just helping you, become better, right?
That's right.
And so I think that, in the story of it all, what can't get lost is that as a company, you have to let people know what those values for you are, right? And so an example about the teeth, or an example about, productivity versus client feedback. If you really value client feedback, but you're only talking to that employee about their time on site being too high, then do you really value client feedback? Because maybe that's a big component of great feedback from clients. And so I think businesses can't overlook that as they think about, metrics.
Yeah, I know a lot of times in the past, and I'll give you an example here a little bit in this next slide here. But a lot of times people are focused on KPIs that they have historically known to be the right ones where they were. But each company is different and unique, right? And what your client experience is, your customer experience, your technical requirements for individuals, their performance requirements for individuals, those change, right?
Yeah.
So now as you can start to see how they align, their story aligns with what the company culture is and the company story is, that's where you start to get real power. Let me show you an example. So this is what an employee could look like. And you may be familiar with this type of graph. This is called a radar chart, or a spider chart. And it's a way of representing it. So let me walk you through this just a little bit if you haven't seen it before. So the idea is to have that little blue area. That's actually how Andy, this is Andy's story. This is how Andy's actually performing. If the whole thing was filled up with blue, you'd be like, man, Andy is hitting a grand slam every single time at bat kind of employee, right? Well, Andy is not hitting a grand slam every day. The green lines show you the really high performers in the company and how they're doing and what's that threshold for a high performers. The dotted black lines tell you average, and the red lines tell you a low performer. I'm going to toss this over to you, Edmund. I mean, looking at this graph here of Andy, does it kind of give you a suspicion as to what's going on already with Andy?
It does. I mean, looking at this data, I would say that Andy's either fairly new to the company and doesn't really know what he's doing yet. And so his production, it's the number of stops he's making, his time on site probably is higher because he hasn't been familiar with the SOPs and the checklist and actually all of those things that go into completing a great service. And so he's definitely underperforming there, but it's almost, if he was a new employee, I would almost expect that.
Yeah.
That would be my sort of expectations of Andy as he gets to understand his job. So what may look like a bad as a first glance, I might say, hey, Andy's been with us 30 days.
That's okay.
That's okay.
But if he was there for 7 years.
But if he's there 7 years, that's a different problem.
That's a different story. Right?
That's a different story, exactly.
And that's the beauty of this thing, is that now with the context of your company and your culture and your employees and your people, this may mean something different to you than it does to someone else. Let's go a little further, and I think you'll start to see some of this, right? And the take-home message here is that each story is custom built to your company, right? If you take this and you apply it to Andy being there for 2 weeks or 30 days, that means one thing. If Andy has just come back from, there was a leave of absence for some reason, and he just came back to the company, that may mean something else. He's been there for 7 years, whole different story, right? So the idea is by seeing these graphs, all of a sudden you start seeing, I know what I need to start to focus on, where I need to pay attention with Andy.
Yeah.
And I think that's immensely powerful, because here's two different stories. There's Dean and there's Andy. And the stories that you see, I'm going to ask you, what do you see with Dean compared? I mean, you thought Andy was this new employee potentially, right?
Yes.
What do you think about Dean? What's the story that comes up in your head?
It's kind of two stories there as well. Either Dean is very great when he shows up, but he doesn't show up very often because he's not making a lot of stops. Or, maybe Dean is a combination of a lead service pro, so he's not actually doing a lot of services, but when he does, his production is high. And so, versus a new employee in Andy, right? So, I can look at this and start to create some of those types of stories. But I think the important thing there is almost like segmentation, same from your customer base. These data points can get you to what my conversation looks like with Dean and Andy, with a sort of consistent set of data points that now I can, hey,
Change.
Dean needs attaboys in these areas.
Yep.
And he needs maybe a checkup in these other areas. Same with Andy.
Here's the beautiful thing about this, and this is why I love and was really excited about working with the PestRoutes team, is that a fair bit of this data actually comes directly from PestRoutes. If you are using PestRoutes already as a company, the foundations for all of these graphs are already there in the company. So being able to see the Andys, the Deans in your company, it's kind of like the ragu sauce. It's already in there.
Yeah, and I love the visual representation where you can scan 10 of these and know exactly where you need to focus your time as a leader, versus, looking at data rows of just straight data where it may take you some time to get a visualization of who should I be spending time with this week or this month. This is a very, very easy way that's, easily visually digestible to be able to do that.
So I want to give everyone in the that's joining us an opportunity to weigh in what they think. And the question we're going to pose to you is, who would you pay attention to, right? With these customer assessments, you can start to figure out, I've always thought, where you pay attention is where you get results. So I'm going to put those graphs back up on screen for you here. And there's a poll on screen. Take a look at these two graphs. Who would you pay attention to? And I'll be the first to admit, there's not a right answer here because it depends on your story. So it looks like we've already got 75%. We're going to focus on Andy and 25% on Dean. Edmund, 75% focused on Andy. What's your thought there?
Yeah, like you said, there's no wrong answer here. I can see where people can take that away. They think, well, if Andy is new or if Andy is a low performer, then that's where you should spend most of your time. I would pose just a different set of, a point of view to say that Dean is already excelling in a lot of areas. For me, I think I would be able to get a lot more out of Dean than Andy.
Yep.
Because Andy is going to need time to get his experience level up, where Dean is already there and he's already performing fairly well. If I make a few tweaks with Dean, I can get much more return on that investment of time. At least that's the way I would look at it. But I think like you said, there's no wrong answer.
And this is something I'd encourage people to do, is we're going to do another one of these. And because I want to give you a chance to start to see this, because you probably have some sort of gut reactions and some feelings when you see this as to what you think is actually happening. And I think trying to tune into that stuff and maybe asking questions around it or saying, this is what I'm seeing, is what becomes really interesting here, because everyone's going to see it differently. Because I'll tell you, with Dean, I kind of think of him as sort of Clark Kent, somewhat similar to you. He hasn't shown his Superman suit yet. If you just focus a little bit of time there, that might be the superhero that you want everyone else in the organization to, he might be the diamond in the rough, potentially, right?
Yep.
But now you know how to pull that diamond out of the rough. So that said, I want to give you another two stories. So we've got Pat and Ocean here, right? And we're going to do another poll here. I want to see who you would focus on, but I want to challenge you just a little bit more. New set of employees, different stories, and who would you pay attention to? So I'd like you to vote as to who you would pay attention to. Let me put those graphs back up on the screen for you. We've got two different employees here, completely different stories again from Andy and Dean that we saw. I'd like you to vote, but I'd also like you to tell me, call the story. What do you see happening? And maybe put that into the comments as to what you see happening in these two stories. So Lynn, I guess we'll give it a couple moments here. And while people are doing that, what are the stories you see here?
Oh, this is great. I think Ocean has a great name. But I see two different employees. One is actually doing a good number of routes, a good number of visits per day. The other is very productive, but not as many stops. And so it's hard to get a gauge of really how productive they are because Ocean hasn't had a lot of at-bats yet, right? And so is she new? Does she have an absenteeism type problem? When she shows up, she's great, but maybe, I can only count on Ocean three out of 5 days a week or something. Whereas Pat is kind of seems like a steady, employee. He's above average in this number of visits he's making per day. His production per hour is great, but also his production per mile is down. So maybe he's either not following routing protocols. Maybe he's being a little bit more free with his windshield time and could actually be more productive if we, paid attention to that.
And I think the question, so and one stat or one metric or measurement we've used here is production per mile, and a lot of people use production per hour. I want to actually take a moment to talk about production per mile because that's something we've talked about, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people use production per hour as how much revenue they're generating in every hour that they work. Production per mile is actually more about the density of the revenue, right? If they're driving 50 miles between visits, well, guess what? Your production per mile is actually going to be pretty low. But if you're in a rural area, that might be more where they're driving 10, 15 miles. But if you're in the middle of New York City, well, you may not have to drive even a mile over the course of a whole day, right? So that production per mile is sort of an equalizing statistic in just a completely different way, and that's part of why we added that in. So I want to see if we can go and see some of the comments here and see if anyone's shared with us. Oh, am I doing that right? Oh. Let's see. Solomon. Pat, thanks, Solomon. I appreciate you chiming in. Pat is getting a good amount of stops done, which could account for the lower production values. Ocean's production could be thrown off because of less services. Work with Pat to identify where we can improve the production values. I think that's a fair assessment, solid plan. Dan, thanks for chiming in as well. Let's see if I can get to read this whole thing here. Pat may have large customers where he doesn't travel much, may not be a problem. Ocean is not doing work apparently. Yeah, I think this is a good insight here, right? You've got commercial customers, you've got residential customers, you've got a multifamily building versus 1 acre lots, right? Makes a huge difference in what's happening. So Ocean may only be making one stop. That's because she's got 14 services in that one building. So lots of context here. Chris says Ocean is safe but needs to increase production. Yeah, Ocean's completing stops from her house because she hasn't made it to any stops, but bringing a lot of revenue. Yeah, so what I think I'm seeing here is that people are starting to see different stories here. Yeah. But hopefully what everyone's getting out of this is that you can start to see these stories and you've got your own sort of dialogue in your head as to what's actually happening here. And based on the type of company, I mean, some companies do wildlife, some don't, right? That's going to change how these stories evolve, right? Do you do mosquito? Do you do bed bugs? All that stuff changes what ends up being the story. All right, let me go to another slide here. Oops. So,
Sorry.
that's right. So what are we here for? The financial impact of all this, right? That's what we talked about, as achieving some financial goals and the analytics to drive effectiveness in your organization. So now that you understand these stories, you can start to see how Ocean or Pat, Andy or Dean, how they need coaching or attaboys in different areas, right? Well, what is the impact of that financially? Because it's nice to know everything about Ocean and Pat. It's wonderful to know about their kids, but what is knowing about their kids and whether their kids brush their teeth or not? What does that have to do with whether the company does well, right? That's what matters at the end of the day. Oops. I am having problems with computer technology today.
It's a Mac.
So
For the cool kids only.
that's right. So when we started talking about those performances leading to behaviors, right, and those behaviors leading to stories, remember, let's go back to that quote a little bit, and it talks about this idea of those stories have a financial impact, right? And what are those behaviors and those stories that lead to that financial impact? So now we have this opportunity, because we're starting to see these stories, to say, here are the things that are really effective. And they lead to potentially more revenue and more efficiency of revenue, right? And here's the things that are ineffective, the things that are what I'll call leakage or risk for the business doing better. If someone is making 3 stops for lunch every day, I might suggest that might be less effective because they can't make as many stops. If they're constantly running late or behind, well, that's less effective. They may not be getting to those last appointments every day. But if someone is taking the time 5 minutes every day to plan out their route and think through it, and it's just 5 minutes, and they make every single one of their stops, and 95% of the time they're making all the stops, and their revisits are going, well, that's a really good thing. That's a really effective behavior. So now starting to see these stories, you can start to tease apart the effective and ineffective. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does. I think what shouldn't get lost in that example is that you may see consistent behaviors across employees, which then that tells you that, hey, maybe it's the business that's causing that, not team members, right? And so you as a business get a chance to also improve how you may schedule, how you may route, how you may schedule breaks, how you may schedule the revenue of jobs, right? A wildlife job versus a termite job versus a commercial job versus a residential job, right? And so, because you want to maximize completion rates, and it's hard to do that maybe if a person is shifting their task set, multiple times in any given day.
Yeah, let me give you an example of that. Revenue per mile is one that I really like as a metric, just because it kind of tells you that density. If you've got someone in a rural route, their revenue per mile is going to be less, right? And someone who is in an urban setting or downtown city sort of setting, their revenue per mile is likely going to be much higher. Trying to compare those two people together and say, hey, how are you doing as a tech? Tell you what, that's not going to work very well, right? And if you go to the tech who is working in a city setting versus one who is working in a rural setting and say, hey, we're filling up, we're doing chemical visits, supply visits once a week. For that person in the city, gosh, that may not work at all, right? That you might actually be holding them back. That process is what is preventing them from making higher production per hour because they don't have anything. And they're simply getting on the phones. I don't have stuff. I don't have what I need, right? The person out there in the field saying, hold on a second, you keep pulling me back in once a week to do this. I don't need to do that, but every 3 weeks. Yeah. It's management that's actually holding them back, not the actual employee. Now it gives you the opportunity to start to see what processes that management's putting on top of them that putting a glass ceiling on.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Exactly, it does.
Let me see if I can get this to work this time. So I want to break this.
Cool kids only. Let me help you out.
So we took some data from a company, and there's a lot on this slide. So I want to focus on this graph here, right? the effective things for a company. And the data points that we use on the outside here, actual stops, production per job, number of jobs completed, production per hour, production per mile. That's something that each company can choose, right? That's not prescriptive for everybody. It depends on the culture of the company and what they're looking for, right? If they want a better customer experience, net promoter score might be there instead, right? Or customer satisfaction rate. So we took this information and we started to assign some dollar values to it and said, what is the opportunity left on the table? So if you look at Ocean, Pat, Dan, Dean, and Andy all together, and you expanded it to that company with 10 employees, so there are 4 out of 10 employees, right? This whole graph should be green if everyone was knocking it out of the park all the time. In this case, there's some room for improvement. You can see that production per mile here. There's a lot of room for improvement there, as in management in this case is kind of holding them back because they've got to drive too far. So they're probably running longer days and they're probably tired at the end of the day. When do accidents occur? When people are worn out at 6:30 at night
and trying to get home.
That's right. They want to get back home to their kids' baseball game, right?
Exactly.
And they're rushing. That's when stuff happens. And it's that production. Now you know where, that again, this is all data that comes directly from PestRoutes, which is what is so beautiful. It's already there. You already have it. You can start to see that and say, I'm holding Ocean back in terms of them getting back to their kids' game. If I gave them more jobs in that neighborhood, in that zip code, all of a sudden they start to move up a couple notches. In this organization, per employee per month is about $4,000, right? 10 employees, that's $40K a month. If you only get a fifth of that, you only realize 20% of that. That's $8,000 a month that you realize in opportunity. So if you only realize 20% of the opportunity in this particular company's case, that's $8,000 a month. Guess what? You've got the right people to do it already. You've got the routes and everything in place. The infrastructure, all the basis is there. It's just about having the conversation the right way with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one thing that shouldn't get lost is before you can have the conversation, I think the aggregation of this data, is important. And I think I wouldn't undersell your role with Aptive of taking telematics data and combining it with PestRoutes data to give these kinds of insights. And so as an executive, as a manager in a branch, or as a service manager, now with the combination of those data sets, you can begin to plan how I'm going to get that $8,000, right? Am I going to get it across the board with just better routing, right? Service managers in charge of routes, that service manager can just look at themselves in the mirror and say, I need to get better. I can schedule people better. I can route people more efficiently, and I can get, this is what the opportunity is. It might be 2 or 3 key employees, right? I know if I can get, Paul or Dan's performance up, then they're my best players. They're going to account for the most of this game, and I'll try to manage the middle of the pack a little higher over time. And so I think, those conversations are definitely things that, as a manager, as an executive, are always within your power. But a lot of times you don't know what the opportunities that you're missing every day because you don't have those data sets, right there in front of you.
And to make sure we're on this path here, as far as how to turn those data and analytics in your organization to an effective outcome, the preferred outcome for your company. This kind of tells you exactly if these are the things that you want to measure in your company, right? Yeah. There's a dollar value to that. So that production per mile, there's a dollar value that we can assign to it and say, look, if you move this up from a score of 20 to 40, right? This is how many more dollars goes into your pocket as a company every month. I think that's powerful. And you know exactly who to talk to about it. Right?
Exactly.
I'll tell you as an executive of a company myself, half the time I wish people would tell me what to do. Just make it easy. Tell me what I got to do today, right? Because I want to go through my checklist because that's what most executives are. We're good at doing checklists. Do this, do this, do this, do this, right?
Yes, yes.
And this kind of lays it out for you. I want to bring up a story that you and I talked about. We were actually just talking about this last night. Sure. Right. We looked at some data. We looked at a graph and we saw an employee that was doing really well. And Carl, I'm sorry, I appreciate you asking that clarifying question. On this graph here, 0 is at the center and 100%. Like think of scorecard here, right? 0 is you getting 0 answers right on the test, and 100, the far outreaches of that circle, is you getting an A+ on the test, right? So if you got a 20, like that production per mile right now is between 0 and 20, so that's a 15, let's say, or 10. If I move that 15 from that inner circle to outer circle, so it's more effective, as an organization, I now start to see the financial impact of doing better in production per mile. Hopefully that answers your question, Carl. But going back to that example, we looked at an employee. It didn't make sense that their visits were really low, because I think kind of like Ocean, actually.
Yep.
They were doing really well when they were on site. They were doing, I mean, safe braking, safe acceleration. They were doing well in all these other places, but their visits were really low. You looked at me when we first saw it, and you're like, this isn't right, Vinay. This is, that doesn't make any sense. And we went back and investigated the data, and we saw that that particular employee only worked 69% of the time. I think 68 or 69% of the hours that everyone else that month had. And you said, we have been having an absenteeism problem. We just couldn't figure out who or where.
Yeah.
And we found it, right?
Exactly. And little things like that in your business, knowing those things, whereas in this industry, we don't have schedules, we have routes. And so if someone misses a route, you don't really know what that cost your business, because we tend to think, hey, they didn't show up that day, I didn't pay them, they're hourly, wage worker. But it does impact your business, because those are routes that need to be rescheduled. Those are routes that need to go on someone else's schedule, right? So maybe you're paying overtime someplace else. Yep. Because someone didn't show up to work today. And so those things that are kind of like I call hidden costs to the business are there, but it's not something you actually see, as you're running your day to day, because you just think, oh, well, that person didn't show up today, I'm not paying them. But you don't think about all the work that needs to carry forward. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually saw in one company's case where an employee left, an employee who was carrying a lot of load, was doing really well for the company, ended up leaving. And we started to see that those routes fell onto 2 others, and they were humping it every day, right?
Exactly.
They were picking up the slack, right? And gosh, guess what? Those people start to become potential people who start saying after 3 months, they're like, I can't do this anymore, right? Yeah, I'm starting to look at other options. So you can start to identify that stuff.
Exactly.
And I don't want to cut you off here, but I do have 2 more slides, and we've got a bunch of questions coming here. So
yeah, let's do it.
So opportunity is this ability to create more revenue, more sustainability for the company, more profitability, right? And be more effective. On the other side of this is risk. I mean, everyone talks about braking and acceleration, idle times, windshield times, these average distances between stops. I mean, if I'm running rural route distances inside of a city, gosh, I could be so much more profitable as a company. So average distance between stops for this company was something that they saw as a risk factor, right? And sometimes it's an accrued risk, right? It's not something that you actually have to reach into your pocket and put $5 out. But every time that they're braking hard, it's like a penny in a penny jar, right? Every time they're braking hard, at some point in time, that penny jar is going to fill up, and they're going to rear end somebody, and that's going to cost you a couple of bucks, right? So what we did here is, for this company, is we started assigning a dollar value to each one of these ineffective behaviors. And on risks, you don't want any red. You want this all 0. And for this company, that ended up being per employee per month was $548. So, across 10 employees, it's about $5,000 a month in accrued risk that you could start to eliminate. It starts to end up being a big, commercial vehicle insurance is no joke these days. They keep jumping up, right?
It does. And things like idle time is really just unproductive time. You're paying for labor that can be better utilized. And so all of these open windows into time give you an as a manager, as an owner, as a branch manager, to say, here are things that I can control. Here are things that I can implement that reduces risk over time.
Yeah.
And improves profitability over time.
And for this company, this is kind of how it all netted out, right? If we take all those effective behaviors, ineffective behaviors, in a best case scenario, we add 96,000 in revenue annually, and we reduce risk by 60K annually. That's $156,000 in impact for that company with 10 technicians a year. I think that moves the needle.
It does.
Right? And are those right for your company, the ones that we show? Absolutely not, right? It's a case-by-case company basis. Each company's got to determine for themselves, like you were saying earlier, what is it really aligns with their story that they're trying to tell as a company, that they're trying to provide as a service to their customers. So do these stories have an impact? I think the answer is yes. So I'm coming to the tail end here, and I think we want to do some Q&A in a second here. And
Carl has a few questions here he's posted.
Yeah, Carl, I appreciate you chiming in. And I think anybody else who's got questions, please feel free to chime in. I want to kind of summarize this, right? Employee and company data that you already have, you can start to see those performances. Those performances, we got click to add text in the middle there. Performances lead to behaviors over time that you can start to see how this changes. And here's actually an older example of Andy, not the same one we saw before, but you can see how Andy's changed over time, right? Those behaviors change, and you can start to see how they're changing as they go from a new employee to a seasoned employee. And those stories now give you the opportunity to see what's happening in your business so you can start to choose your end.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
I love it.
So here's some contact information. Would love to start answering some questions. Christy, Lynn, how do we go from here?
Yeah, so we've saved the last few minutes here of the presentation today for questions specifically. So if everybody could drop your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, we'll start to go through those. But before we do hit the Q&A session, I just want to let everybody know that Lynn, our moderator, is going to drop a couple of links into the chat for you. One, for those of you that aren't a PestRoutes customer, this is your opportunity to see our software and what Aptive is using firsthand. And then she's also going to put a link into a link to CAARMO as well. This is another great opportunity for you to see more about what Vinay's presented here today and learn more about his business as well. So I appreciate everybody joining us for this, and we'll go ahead and jump into Q&A now. You probably saw some of those there, Vinay. Do you want to go ahead and jump in with some of the ones Carl had, or you want me to start reading these off to you?
Let's do it. I mean, Edmund and I were kind of thinking through some of this as we're kind of doing the transition here. So Carl said, so these scores are somewhat capricious and arbitrary just to be consistent. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good foundation in sort of the thought there. I mean, what are your thoughts about these? I mean, I think there's a deeper message that Carl's asking here is you don't want to just give people numbers, right? You don't want to run people by the numbers, right? But by building the story, you have this ability to build consistency in terms of how you want people's stories to end. Does that make sense? Is that kind of answering Carl's question, you think, then?
Yeah, I think Carl has a good point, and I would agree with one part of that is that a team member or employee's value is not only just numbers, right? However, as an ex-athlete, you are who your track record says you are, right? If Hall of Fame was just this week, those players that were inducted into the Hall of Fame over time, over their careers, exhibited by numbers their superiority over other players that played their position over time, right? And so at one specific point in time where you take one game, of course they all had bad games.
That's right.
Right? Of course they all had bad seasons, but over time, the consistency of the behaviors that you would expect should show. And so I think that from that standpoint, it does come back to how are you ever going to hold someone accountable if you don't have a bar of what's expected? And so that part of it, you don't want to sort of be cutthroat about it. I get that point with Carl, and I would 100% agree with that. But if you're not evaluating them objectively, then how can you effectively do your job? How can you effectively give feedback? And I think the way, CAARMO has done it with the chart that you talked about, you're really talking about, the 20th percentile, the 40th percentile. So if you're in the 20th percentile, meaning if you're in that small circle, then that's as a percentage of your other teammates.
That's right.
So if your other teammates are performing at a high level, you're comparing them against the team, not arbitrarily comparing them to, some sort of made up standard.
Yeah, I think another way I might say a lot of what you're just saying there is lots of times the difficulty in talking with employees is, do you have the right measuring stick to show them, right?
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden you have this opportunity to say, in this particular role, here's the measuring stick. Measure yourself, right? You know how you're being held accountable to that. I mean, I used to do track and field and stuff, right? When I saw my time at the end of that 400 race, right, I knew, all right, I need to really stretch before I run the race, right? Because I'm 2 seconds slower in that 400, which is last or first.
And in that example, of course, there's other runners with different sets of capabilities, right? Different sets of lung capacity, athletic ability, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So you don't know if Vinay is doing the best that Vinay can do, right? And I think that's one thing you have to sort of keep in context is this the best that Vinay can do? But you're right, that stick of what was your time?
Yeah.
that's a sort of objective stick to measure against.
So Lynn's got a couple of, Lynn's posted some questions out here from others as well. Let's see, we've got, how can you score production as a percentage? Do you wanna hazard a?
Well, if you're referring to the graphs that you've displayed, it's literally a percentage of against the team members or that branch, right? And so the quantifiable number of stops they made is one thing. The number of stops they made versus the number of stops the team has made as an average, that's where you can sort of say, in that 20th percentile, 20, that's who's at the bottom of that average.
Right.
And the ones who are at 100 are at the top of that average, right? And so, if you looked at as a branch operator, you say, how many stops am I doing per day? There's certain people who've done more than others on that number, right? And so that's what that is. And so that's how I would score it.
Yeah, and this is the beautiful, this is what I've, myself and my company, what we've enjoyed so much about PestRoutes is this has been so, easy peasy to do with PestRoutes because they've already got all this information, just constantly spitting this information out, right? It's telling you what routes, what revisits, right? When they check in, when they check out, all this wealth of information is there. But how do you take this gigantic spreadsheet and distill it down to something and say, I know how to take action on it, right? Yeah. And being able to take all that information out of PestRoutes, which makes our lives easy peasy, right? It gives us all that information, and then we can start to rack and stack it in essentially a report card. Everyone's familiar with that, right? I got an A, I got an A minus, I got a B minus. If you were like me, your parents are always telling you to study a little bit harder. But now you know what to study on, right? Where to spend your time and attention so you can become better as an employee, right? It gives you the power to have that objective, unbiased conversation with them saying, here's the gold standard that I'm holding you against, right? Because everyone in this role is doing that. Here's how you're stacking up. Ask them, so how can I help? Right? And if they want to opt in, great. If they don't, great. Right?
Vinay, there's another great question here I thought would be a good one for you to take a look at. Solomon asked, how many metrics do you recommend tracking per service professional? How do you know that for your employees?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. Yeah. The answer is it kind of depends on the culture, right? So what usually happens is there are, as a company, there's 74 different metrics that we can pull out of just based on what we get from PestRoutes. There's a treasure trove of information. Then there's the telematics, the GPS stuff, right? We bring all that stuff together and we start asking this question of what is really effective in your organization, right? What is ineffective in your organization? And we start to watch that stuff and you can start to say, Jack, Manny, and Mo are the really effective employees. What do they happen to do really well? And if we start to see that, they kind of start to play out by themselves. So the answer is, I don't know. The answer is each company, it depends on a company as to what their culture and what they value is. And while there may be 10 companies up and down the road that do the same thing in terms of pest control, same market, your culture is different, right? You want to spend time with your customers and explaining things to them. The company down the street believes a different philosophy. Those philosophies come out in what we study. So Solomon, the answer to your question is it's just a matter of understanding the culture.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain books out there. I subscribe to the WIG framework, Wildly Important Goals. And in that framework, they recommend no more than 3 to 5.
Yeah.
I've evolved a little bit, and I would say no more than 3 to 5 at a time. And so it may not be the same 3 in July or the 3 in January, because it's summer, it's a different period for the business. And so doesn't mean that the 3 are always the same, but I think that's a good rule of thumb. Somewhere between, 3 to 5 is something that you can focus on and actually have an impact on. However, that doesn't mean they have to only be the same 3 to 5 all the time.
Yeah, you and I were talking last night about this idea of being able to talk to area, region managers, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And being able to give them a playbook for the next, some period of time, right? What if you could say over the next 30 days, I want you to focus on this, right? Because this office A has got different things that they've got to focus on compared to office B versus office C, right?
Exactly.
You can do it at an employee or an individual level. You can do it at a team. You can do it at a branch. You can do it as a region or as a company, right? This scales up and down, and the stories of each one of them are different, right? Because
Exactly.
for the West region, you may want to focus on net promoter scores. Here, you want to focus on pricing, right?
Exactly.
And profitability. So, I've given
Hopefully
you,
that answers your
yeah, it
question.
gives you a broad answer to your question. It depends on what question you're trying to answer.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more. If that's okay.
Yeah.
So we've got one here. Where do safe brakes and safe accelerations come from? I think she's trying to figure out where the data is coming from.
Yeah, so that information comes from a telematics system, right? So the little OBD2 little dongle that plugs into those vehicles, or that's strapped in to the vehicles. That information comes from there, and it's based on thresholds that come back from that system. So lots of times they'll tell us automatically that this is traditionally someone who's pulling 1G off the start line every time. Well, I don't think you want to be doing that or braking that hard, right? So those things come directly from that telematics system telling us that and who is doing it.
That's great. I never do that when I drive. All right, guys, I think we're about done here. We're going to wrap up. We're coming close to the top of the hour here. Thank you guys again. I really appreciate this. You guys, I know, put a lot of time and thought into this to share with our audience. And hopefully everybody here appreciated hearing firsthand how this works. Those graphs are amazing. I think there's a lot of value here and I appreciate it. I just want to let our audience know again, we're going to have another webinar again next month, and just keep an eye out on your inbox and your social media feeds for that, and we'll keep it going. We will be sending a recording of this out. We'll have links to the information we shared today as well. So you'll get that here in the next few days from our team. Anything else, guys?
I appreciate the opportunity, and Edmund, thanks for adding some color to all of what I was saying.
I appreciate you having me.
Thank you all so much.
PestRoutes and Christy.
Have a good afternoon. Thank you.